Airplanes always made people reveal who they really were. Trapped in narrow aisles and recycled air, patience thinned quickly. On Flight 782 to Chicago, tension began quietly, almost invisibly, like a storm forming behind clear skies. James Carter sat in seat 18B, hands folded over a worn leather cane. At 72, his back ached from years of factory work, and flying exhausted him. He wore a gray coat, neatly pressed, and a cap he removed respectfully once seated. He watched passengers board, some rushing, some irritated, some already angry at invisible problems. The flight attendant, Emily Ross, moved briskly down the aisle. She was young, efficient, and already stressed. The flight was delayed, the cabin full, and management had warned them about complaints. Emily prided herself on control. She believed order kept chaos away. As James shifted slightly, trying to ease his leg, his elbow brushed the aisle. Emily stopped. She asked him to keep his arm within his seat. James nodded apologetically and adjusted. It should have ended there. Minutes later, turbulence shook the plane while still at the gate. A bag fell from an overhead bin, startling James. He instinctively stood halfway to steady himself. Emily rushed back, her voice sharp, telling him to sit immediately. James explained calmly that he was just startled and needed a moment. Passengers nearby began watching, phones subtly angled upward. Emily felt eyes judging her authority. She repeated herself louder. James slowly sat, his hands trembling slightly. He said he understood, but the moment lingered. Emily noticed James murmuring to himself, a habit he had developed when anxious. He interpreted it as defiance. She leaned closer and warned him that noncompliance would not be tolerated. James looked up, confused and hurt. He explained he had arthritis, anxiety, and trouble hearing. He asked her to speak slower. Instead of compassion, Emily felt irritation. She was behind schedule. She felt challenged. She told him rules applied to everyone. A man across the aisle muttered something about troublemakers. Another passenger sighed loudly. The atmosphere shifted. James felt decades collapse onto his chest. He had lived through segregation, insults, silent exclusions. He had learned to stay calm. He did so now. Emily radioed the purser. Her words were clipped. She said the passenger was being disruptive. James heard only fragments, but understood enough. His heart sank. The purser arrived, a middle-aged man named Carl. He asked James what was wrong. James explained again, slowly, respectfully. Carl listened, nodding, but his eyes kept flicking toward Emily, who stood rigid, arms crossed. Carl asked Emily for her version. She described noncompliance, disturbance, and refusal to follow instructions. Her voice was confident. James realized his calmness was being translated into guilt. Carl made a decision quickly. He said they could not risk safety. He informed James he would have to deep. Plain gasps rippled through nearby rows. James felt heat rise behind his eyes. He asked why. He had not yelled. He had not cursed. He had followed instructions. Carl said it was about safety and cooperation. As security approached, Emily felt a flicker of doubt, but pushed it away. She told herself she had learned to trust procedure over emotion. James stood slowly, gripping his cane. Passengers watched, some silent, some recording openly. As he walked down the aisle, someone whispered that it was unfair. Another shook their head. Emily avoided his eyes. James paused briefly and looked at her. He did not shout. He did not insult her. He simply said he hoped she never felt as small as he did in that moment. Those words landed heavier than any argument. Emily froze. The doors closed behind James, but the silence he left behind remained. The flight eventually departed. Emily performed her duties mechanically. Every clink of a cup sounded louder than usual. She replayed the incident repeatedly, searching for reassurance that never came. Her certainty began cracking, replaced by unease she could not silence. Across the aisle, a young woman wiped tears from her face. A businessman stared at his tray table, ashamed of his earlier silence. Others scrolled through comments forming online, watching the story escape the cabin and enter the world. After landing, videos spread rapidly. Headlines questioned airline practices. Captions accused racism, ageism, and abuse of power. Millions watched James walking with his cane, calm and dignified, removed within minutes. The contrast angered people deeply. James's phone rang constantly. Reporters wanted interviews. Advocates wanted statements. He declined most. He was not interested in becoming a symbol. He wanted rest, respect, and understanding. The airline launched an investigation within hours. Emily was called into a meeting the next morning. Managers played the footage from multiple angles. They paused, rewound, and asked her to explain decisions she had once defended confidently. Her words felt smaller in the room. She spoke about policy, safety, and procedure, but each explanation sounded rehearsed and thin. One manager asked why de-escalation was never attempted. Emily had no answer. Human Resources informed her she was terminated for violating company conduct and failing to demonstrate appropriate judgment. Fired on the spot. 5 minutes later, her badge no longer worked, and her uniform no longer represented authority. Emily left the building numb. Outside, planes roared overhead, travelers hurried past. The world continued normally. Inside her chest, something collapsed. She remembered James's eyes. She remembered his quiet dignity. She remembered choosing control over compassion. At home, Emily replayed the footage herself. She noticed details she had ignored before: her tone, her posture, her assumptions. She realized how quickly she had labeled James without truly listening. James sat at his kitchen table watching the news. Friends called him brave. Strangers sent letters of support. Donations appeared in his name. He did not feel heroic. He felt tired, but also strangely lighter, as if a long-carried weight had finally been acknowledged. He thought about his father, who had been removed from a bus decades earlier for speaking up. He thought about how little had changed, and how much still needed to be. Yet he also saw something new. People were paying attention. Weeks passed. Emily attended mandatory bias counseling as part of her termination agreement. For the first time, she confronted ideas she had dismissed. She listened instead of defending. The process was painful but necessary. One evening, Emily wrote a letter. She apologized without excuses. She admitted fear, ego, and bias she had never confronted honestly. She acknowledged harm and responsibility. She did not ask forgiveness. She simply owned her actions. James read the letter slowly, twice. He felt anger, sadness, and understanding all at once. He did not immediately respond. Healing was not rushed. Accountability mattered more than comfort. Eventually, James wrote back. He said, forgiveness was a journey, not a switch. He hoped Emily would carry the lesson forward. He wished her growth, not punishment. The story faded from headlines, replaced by newer outrage. So social media moved on. But for those on Flight 782, it remained a turning point, a reminder that silence enables harm, and that dignity can endure even the shortest, harshest moments. Emily found work months later, not in the sky, but in a community center, assisting elderly residents. She listened more. She spoke less. She remembered James often. James flew again eventually. He still felt anxious boarding planes, but he carried himself with the same calm strength. When a young attendant offered extra help kindly, he smiled and thanked her. Airplanes still reveal who people really are. Sometimes they reveal who we still need to become. And sometimes they offer a chance to choose differently, even after the doors have closed. In the weeks that followed, discussions reached workplaces, classrooms, and dinner tables. People debated rules versus humanity, authority versus empathy. Some defended the decision, citing safety without context. Others questioned how easily certain bodies were labeled threats. James received a call from the airline's CEO, offering a personal apology and lifetime travel vouchers. James accepted the apology, declined the vouchers, and asked instead for mandatory empathy training. The request surprised executives, but it was implemented quietly. Emily watched from a distance as policy updates were announced publicly. She felt both relief and regret. Change had come, but at a cost that included her career and another man's humiliation. Passengers from the flight shared their own reflections online. Several admitted they had stayed silent out of fear or convenience. Others promised to speak up next time. The moment became a mirror for thousands. James began speaking at small community gatherings, not about anger, but awareness. He told people that dignity did not require volume. He emphasized listening, patience, and accountability. His words carried weight because they were lived, not rehearsed. Emily attended one of those talks anonymously. She sat in the back, tears quietly falling. She did not approach James. She was not ready, but she listened fully for the first time. Months later, they met privately, arranged through a mediator. The conversation was not dramatic. It was honest, awkward, and human. They spoke about fear, assumptions, and the cost of unchecked authority. They did not become friends, but they reached understanding. Life moved forward. Flight 782 became just a number again. Yet somewhere in the sky, every raised voice, every enforced rule, carried a reminder of that day. Airplanes continued flying, people continued carrying histories into tight spaces, and sometimes, in those spaces, choices were made that echoed far beyond the cabin walls. James often reflected on how quickly moments could define lives. 5 minutes had changed public perception, corporate policy, and personal trajectories. He wondered how many similar moments passed unnoticed every day. Emily kept a journal. She wrote about control, fear, and the false comfort of rules. Without context, writing became accountability. It kept her from forgetting. On another flight, months later, a different attendant faced a similar situation. This time, she knelt, listened, and resolved it calmly. No one filmed, no one was removed. The plane departed quietly. Progress was rarely loud. James heard about that story secondhand and smiled softly. Change, he believed, did not always announce itself. The image of that flight remained online, frozen in time. A snapshot of tension, power, and consequence. People would continue to interpret it differently, but its impact could not be erased. In the end, it was never just about a seat or a rule. It was about seeing the person in front of you, especially when it was inconvenient. Airplanes still reveal who people really are. And sometimes they reveal who we choose to become, one decision at a time. James kept flying until age no longer allowed it. Each trip reminded him of resilience earned through years of endurance. He never forgot the faces in that cabin. Emily continued rebuilding. Trust, she learned, was slower than authority, but stronger. She carried the lesson everywhere. Some stories end loudly. Others continue quietly inside people, shaping future choices. This one did both. And, somewhere between takeoff and landing, humanity was tested, lost, and slowly relearned. Passengers would forget the flight number, but not the feeling. The discomfort lingered, urging reflection long after luggage was claimed. James believed dignity was not something given by authority. It was something carried, even when challenged. Emily believed accountability was not punishment. It was responsibility accepted. The sky remained the same. People changed beneath it. Every journey carried lessons beyond destinations. Some lessons demanded courage to face, some demanded humility to accept, and some demanded both. That day demanded both. The cabin had been small, but the impact was vast. 5 minutes echoed for years. Choices mattered, listening mattered, humanity mattered, and in that narrow aisle, the world briefly paused, watched itself, and learned, imperfectly, how to do better. That lesson traveled farther than the plane ever did, settling quietly into countless minds, waiting to guide the next difficult decision when compassion and authority collide. Change begins there, in moments like these, remembered, repeated, and responsibly transformed. For everyone.